Hi, welcome to my channel. Today's video is featuring this painting. I painted it almost a year ago and filmed it on my camera and didn't find it until just recently. So I edited it, and I hope you'll enjoy the step-by-step of creating a Carolina wren and making the entry in my backyard bird book. Today is one of those days when, man, you either have to take a nap or get up and do something. So I decided today's time to add to my journal. This is my backyard bird journal that I started with the use of the Merlin bird identification app. Carolina wren is very popular in my area, or prolific, I guess, in my area is more than popular. So I decided to work on it today. It was bird number 5 in my journal that I've already sketched him out. And thank you to Don Danko for the photograph in here, and we'll give it a shot. I'm using the inexpensive Soho Urban Artist kit that I featured not too long ago in a video on how I changed the palette. But you see how dark these colors are? That's why it's so helpful to have a key, because you'd never think in the light that you see that you could tell what these colors are. But I have my key handy in the order of my paint, so I know what color's what. When I put it in my journal, I don't really care that much about this being a finished painting per se. I want the bird as accurately displayed as possible. There is a log underneath it that I'm going to go ahead and kind of lay in. What I'm doing right now is I'm wetting the branch that I see. I'm just going to give this an initial wet on wet look. I'm going right up to the bird. I'm going to stop right now. That's a little too wet. I don't mind it being somewhat wet, but I don't need it totally wet. So see, I did little lines so that the whole, some of it takes water, some of it doesn't. Kind of gives it a bark kind of looking effect. I want to make sure the part that's painted is all the way up to the bird. And a little bit of different colors. You don't want it all the same. Pick up a little bit of that where it's puddling. And then I'm going to do the same thing under here. It's going to continue the branch, skipping the bird. Squeeze a little bit if you're using a water brush and the water's not coming out. I didn't totally clean the tip real well. I can see a little bit of color, but that shouldn't matter, because this is going to dry. It always dries lighter. And I'm looking at the foot of the bird. I didn't draw it real accurately, but it's just a line, so I think I'll be able to go around that. All right, so I'm going to hold my journal up and let you see what's wet. All right, you see how some of it's wet and some of it's not? That's going to help me in my paint. So again, so that it's not an even fill. Paint around the wing of the bird. And so you want that random. You don't want it all the same. Now, I probably should have been a little more consistent in the color. What I'm doing is I'm using leftover paint off my palette for some of this. So it's kind of a mixture of other colors. All right, and I'm just going to let that go off the page. I'm not going to worry about what other things. Well, not much. Okay, I'm going to add a little bit of that other color. Now mine right now is much darker than what's in the photo, but again, it's going to dry lighter. I'm going to drag some of that off a little longer, just to make it a little different. Okay, I wipe my brush to clean it, and now I look at the lightest part of the bird, which is the white, which I want to make sure that under its beak that I don't paint anything there. I want to make sure that the curve of this beak, I didn't see that in my initial drawing. So I want to kind of remind myself that his beak curves quite a bit. I might not have it quite long enough. This was wet on wet because I wanted a soft edge, and part of this in here was dry, so it gives me a hard edge. The outside edge was dry. It controlled the paint from moving beyond where it was wet. I don't want any of the dampness of the bird when I paint the bird to, move into the branch. So I'm going to work on his head for a minute. And I'm looking at the eye. Okay. Redraw that a little bit better. Lightly erase. A little smaller, I think. Okay, I'm going to outline kind of where the white is to remind me not to paint in here. And up under the chin here, and a little bit of specks in through there. All right, so I already have kind of a yellowy gold on my palette. I'm going to start with that, almost orange, and he's kind of almost orange. So I'm coming in with a very wet brush. Of course, the more water I have in my brush, the lighter the paint's going to be. So I'm going to bring it down here. I left you can see I skip around just a little bit because there's some little white flecks on him. You can hear my wind chimes outside. I don't know if y'all can hear them or not. I don't usually always hear much. Now this part of this looks dry. It's not shiny anymore. That's shiny. I got it wetter. So I'm going to go ahead and all of this in through here is color, but I want it to be a little darker under the shadows. So I'm going to come in with this tone. It's a little richer color and kind of create a shadow cast on the underside of his belly, and I want that to go all the way out to the very outside of the bird. There's a hint of this up under some of his other wings. I'm going to go ahead and put some of that in there. I'm going to spread it out because the darker tones will be on top. This will just give kind of an underneath tone to the bird. And I didn't do a very good job of that, getting all the way up to the edge of the bird, so I will come back with his tail and cover that up. And a little bit on his wing here. Okay, so leave that, let that dry. I'm looking at my key over here. This is gray down here, but I don't want it just gray, so I've got a little bit of pink that was up here. There's a little bit of blue that's here. His beak looks more bluish gray, so I'm going to try to control the water here. I'll come back with that little breathing hole, leave a spot. And kind of take this gray tone up. It's darker than what I want, so I just dab my brush. There's some gray flecks up under his eye. You want to mimic what the feathers are doing with your brush strokes. So if the feathers are real short, I'm barely touching. You see how I'm just tapping with my brush, trying to just mimic that. I don't like that line right there. I'm going to blur that out a little bit and lift that up a little bit more. Okay, and let that dry. I'm going to go into, really looks like a burnt sienna for most of him. Now where the white is, I think I'm going to put his eye in first so I can work around that. Okay, his eye's right here. Try to leave a tiny bit of white for the reflection in the eye. And I can always go back and add that with my white gel pen if I lose it. But if I can do that in the initial painting, I really like to do that. Okay, now I'm going to go with my burnt sienna and start painting in around. Okay, the eye, the white is right in here. Might have drawn his head a little big, but that was freehand, so yeah, it's not always going to be perfect. And that's all right. I'll get enough of him correct to be able to identify him. Want some more of that orange tone. So I like to do more than one color because this is feathers, I'm going to break up that white with teeny little strokes. It comes right up to the top of the eye. Now, if you were really into high detailed realism, you're going to want to do layers and layers and layers to create texture. But in this little journal, I don't want to spend that much time. I want to spend enough time to capture the bird, and possibly even on the opposing side, maybe a little bit of details about him, her, whether it's male or female, where it lives, where I saw it, maybe how big the eggs are, that kind of thing. See, I want to add even a little red to that. Can't tell I did, but I did. I added, well, actually it was a violet that I added to that brown to give it a little more warmth. It's pretty dark in here, so I added some of that violet to the brown in here. Again, speckled. So I'm bouncing my brush just a little bit, trying to look and see where the colors shift. The feathers on the top of his head are a lot shorter, so I kind of want my brush strokes to mimic that. Now they're getting a little longer, his upper wings, and I can lay my brush down and do longer strokes to get that feel of those longer feathers. And then right in here, they get a little darker. They're not quite that reddish tone, more of a brown. And there's some right through here that are all folded up. They even get darker in here, so I might even have to, sometimes I just look on my palette and see what's dark and just mix it in with what I'm currently using. I do that with oils, so yeah, why not do it with watercolor too sometimes. All right, now, okay, there's speckles on the feathers. So, and some stripes in there. So I'm going to do a line and then bounce my brush a little bit, crisscross for those shorter feathers. You don't want to be exactly the same because then it's going to not look normal. Sorry, had to stop and observe. Then there's some longer feathers. Now he's getting back to that burnt sienna color again. And some of that purple is looking a little more more purpley than I wanted it to. So we'll come back. See, that's still wet, so it can pull in and kind of mix. All right, this is a group of feathers that we'll just do the long strokes first. And then we'll come back with some darker brown, maybe with a little blue added to it to make it even darker. See, the dark tones up here have already faded. The wetter your paper is, the more it'll fade. And I have a tendency to be in a hurry. I don't know if you can tell that I don't like to wait for one thing to dry while something else is going. So I'm going to leave, because of that, I'm going to leave that alone for a minute and come in and do this. Connect these with the longer strokes. That's the other side of the bird. That's the back. That right there is the back of the can't think, wing. Sorry. Sometimes when you're painting, your mind, your talking interferes with your right brain. All right, so now I want the upper side. If you look at this bird, the light catches the very top of its head. So I'm going to let that catch. And while this is all being kind of run together, I'm going to go ahead and do some of his tail. And I don't think I drew his tail quite long enough. See, well, it's hard to tell because the picture's cut off. I don't think it's very long, but we're going to stop it about right there. And it'd probably be smart to stop and look it up, but, you know, like I said, it's for journal entry. I'm not competing in a wildlife. Not competing in anything. This is for me and for y'all. Hopefully there'll be something here that's helpful. All right, so some of this is starting to dry. While that's sort of wet, now I'm going to put a couple, see if I can give some hint of some speckles. Still too dry for that. I mean, too wet for that, sorry. Let's try over here where I painted a minute ago. That's a little better. Okay, then there's the feathers that are right, let's see, it's a little further over. Yeah, right through there. These start to have some lines on them. Still might be too wet. So much watercolor is just waiting till it's dry enough. All right, I want this is still wet, but this is dry. So now I want these two to kind of mingle together. So I clean my brush a little bit, and I'm working on wet paper. What's closer here is more speckled, so I'm going to use kind of a stippling technique, just dabbing to create more of a feather look, and then bring that up toward his chin a little bit. All right, this is now dry, but if you'll see, it's much lighter than the picture. So I'm going to take some more of this color and add a tiny bit of burnt sienna to it and come up under here to create a shadow. Okay, that's a hard edge. Dry my brush, wet this, try it a little bit, not dry it, but wipe. I wanted to take some of that color off. I had too much color on my brush. Now I'm going to start doing the tiny little strokes on this to come up and meet the other area. I'm filming this with my Canon M50, and I did not connect my microphones, so I'm hoping you can hear me fine. Like I said, sometimes when I'm painting, I get quiet, but I want you to know what I'm thinking, so I'm trying to tell you what I'm looking at. Okay, I want a variation that around the eye is darker, so I'm taking a darker gray now that this is dry, and going, and you see how tiny this is a Pentel water brush, but how I can just put little bitty, I'm barely touching the paper, and I just love the little lines I can get. All right, now you can see there's not much texture here or in the bark. So while the bird's drying some more, I'm going to go back and work in the bark. Now I'm looking, well, let's go ahead and paint his toes. His toes are kind of on a pink side. You see a little bit of it going this direction, here, and kind of there. It's weird looking. Almost looks like part of the... Oh, his whole leg is sticking. Okay, that's why. This is a leg. All right, this is a leg. Then there's a back toe here, and this toe is forward. And then the other is behind, so that's his back toe. So they kind of all ran together. All right. While that's wet, I'm going to make the underneath part a little darker. It's kind of funny. Okay, and this had a claw. That's probably too big. If it's too big, just blur it out. Well, that might have ruined it, but hey, that's okay. I can distract it by the dark of the branches, and the branches I want very jagged and random. So normally watercolor is dark over light. Let's say that right. Normally watercolor is from the light to dark, so it's dark over light. But I'm putting some darker tones in right now just so that I can remember where some of it. I picked up some black, which might be a little too dark, but I did want to just add a little bit up underneath, and then we'll add some other jagged areas in to make it just a little more uneven. You just don't really want too much of that because it's going to be a total distraction to the bird. But maybe what I wanted was a distraction from the foot. So that's all right. It might distract enough from the foot to do just fine. And this seems really dark right now. Underneath the bird is darker. We'll almost paint it over that toe. You can make him a little skinnier this way. Well, helps to pick up enough paint. Okay, what I'm doing now is just picking up some of that paint, transferring it with my brush so it's not so thick and heavy. Squeeze my brush just a little bit to wet some of that black to get it to move a little bit. All right, so now the branch is wet, the bird is dry, and the bird's not near dark enough. So I'm going to come back with the burnt sienna because that's more of the rusty color that I see. And I'm going to reestablish some of the feathers in the direction that I saw. And the colors. That's where this wing was over the other one. Pick up the browner tone as I get further to these feathers. I want a little more orange in that. Okay, I want his underside a little more shadowy. So I'm picking up a little gray, a little bit of that golden color. It would be very similar to the branch because I didn't quite make the branch gray enough. Oh, the picture really makes that bird look red. It is not near that red in real life. Maybe when it dries it'll look better. So, okay, we're going to make this a little darker. I wanted it softer, so I went ahead and did it while it was wet. Anytime you want a soft edge, soft blur, it needs to be wet paper. Or you're moving from wet paint into wet paint. Wet paint into wet paint will also give you a blur. Sometimes that blur disappears too quickly, so I'm going to have to let that dry. All right, I'm going to come back to the bird. You can see a little light coming in from underneath. This particular paint has a white, so I'm going to give it a try. If I can lighten up the underneath side of the bird through here. So white, true watercolor has no white. And sometimes I use the gouache in my painting, but we'll see how this does. Right now, I wasn't planning on putting any background. I was just going to leave it plain. And I'm going to stop for a second and hit it with a hairdryer. Okay, one of the things you can do when you're working is try to make your drawing the same size as your photograph. And so now when I'm enlarging this to be the same size, I realize the eye is too small. So I can either come back in with my brush, which I'm doing right now, or I could have chosen, since the bird's eye is black, I could have done it with a small marker. And that's often what I do is when I'm working with little bitty things, if I want to emphasize that with the marker, sometimes I'll do that instead. And for teeny tiny lines, I have a 005. microns. So I'm gonna, when I'm looking at this bird and I see the radiating feathers that come from around his eye, I'm gonna see if I can kind of exaggerate that again. Again, I want him accurate, but I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on it. And when I'm zooming in on this, this looks more brown than what I have. Sorry. My Fitbit was vibrating. I had to look at it. See what's happening. I am seeing a little more, a little more brown, a little more variation with white speckles. So I'm going to tone that reddish tone down just a little bit. But I'm going to come back. See all this white in through here? I didn't really get that. So I'm going to try the white paint that's in this set first and see how that does. It's not real opaque, but that's not real thick and heavy. So let me see if I load my brush a little heavier, how that'll do. Kind of gives a mottled look, which is all right. But if I want a brighter, more vibrant white, I have two options. I can either get the gouache out, which is an opaque, well, let's see the light on, can y'all see what I'm looking at? Here, let me move this over. Whoop. There's light on the outside of that wing. So I'm going to lighten that up just a little bit. Kind of get the feel of stripes. There were some stripes here, and I was putting them in with dark, so now I'm going to emphasize the light. Maybe that'll be okay. Then all right, so the tips here are white, and that's not going to be white enough. So what I like to do, if I want more white and I want tiny white, I look for my white gel pen, and I need to go get it. My white gel pen that I really like is the Signo Uniball, and I'm looking, first of all, let's make sure it's working. It's hard to tell if it works on white, so yay. All right, check it out. I'm looking where the whitest white is. There's a little bit of white up at the top of these feathers. There's a little bit, a dot. See how much easier that is? There's a curve of white here, another curve there. These weren't white enough, so I'm going to go ahead and wet them again with that. That's a little too white. If it's a little too white, just hit it with the brush, and that'll soften it. Okay, so that's giving me some of the patterns. Now I need to go back with the darks on that. I need a little bit of light in through here. I do not want it bright white, so I do what I just did, lay it in, and then hit it with the water to soften that. If it's still too bright, then I can go over with the darker paint. Now, a minute ago, I did a lot of light, or I had some light on the foot, so I'm going to lighten the top of the foot a little bit. I don't want to draw too much attention to it, but I do want to kind of highlight where the light hits it. If I want to make the jagged bark a little more detailed, I can do some little zigzags, hit that with the light as well. I don't really think that's necessary. I don't think so. It's going to distract. Okay, so now the bird's pretty dry. This part right in here is not dark enough. I have a choice at this point. Here's my teeny tiny pen. Do I want to add more dark with paint, or do I want to add dark with some of the pen? I usually add the pen at the very end. So let me look at this again. I think we're going to come back with some dark. So I'm going to dry my brush, make sure the white's off of it. And what I'm looking at adding is some detailing in here. I need it darker. I need it a dark brown, not quite black. So I'm going to pick up the black. No, excuse me, it's a gray in this palette. I'm going to drag it over here. You can't even see that. Well, let me pull back a little bit. Okay, I'm putting it in the corner of this palette right here. This is gray. and then I'm picking up one of the darker browns, which is the burnt umber. Now this palette, the thing I didn't like about this palette, the burnt umber and the brown look almost identical. If I was designing this palette, I would have picked different colors to that were more varied than that. Okay, so now I'm looking where I've laid in the white, and I'm going to go in between the white on here. Create a little variation in that, and you can see the line, the linear line. Ooh, that's a little thick. That's okay. There's a little darkness in between this part of the feather, and just want to be subtle with this, but I want enough to indicate the coloration on the bird. I'm not going to worry about those teeny little lines because that's going to be done with the black pen. All right, a little too much on my brush. These are at a slight angle. Just kind of bouncing that in, just giving it texture. The tail is the same way. Look at the direction of the, and then they kind of get a little more varied, but they're almost across the tail rather than lengthwise with the tail. So look at the directions. I also want it darker up under here, the bird. The back side, its feathers. On the body, the shadows are in feathers. So if you don't add enough dark and light, then your bird is going to look flat. So I'm going to add a little more shadow and shading to the front belly so that he looks a little more rounded. Kind of scumbling around, giving that a little rough. Okay, see how dark the inside of that? I need that much darker, so I'm going to pick up this dark gray. I'm going to draw that in because if I don't have it dark enough, that's not going to look like the wing. Now this wing has a dark tip. So again, I'm going to go a little bit more dark, a little bit more dark here, and in between the white. And for those of you who've been following me, thank you so much. I cannot believe that I have over 2,000 subscribers. I remember celebrating when I had 100. So regardless of how long you've been with me, if you've followed me on this journey, man, I really appreciate it. I'm going to try to stay true to posting at least once a week, if not more than that, because I've really enjoyed the journey. My frustrating part is the editing, to be totally honest. So I need to try some more live feeds. I've never announced when I was going to do a live feed because I was always afraid, to be totally honest, that nobody would show up. So if you think you would show up for a live, I've never done a premiere. I'm always by myself. So the thought of reading the comments and trying to keep up with what you're doing at the same time is kind of overwhelming to me. All right, I want his foot to be darker because the shadow over it, that's probably a little too red. So I'm going to come back with a little gray, tone that down. And then this little foot over here needs to have a little shadow under it. Okay, well, what do you think? How is that looking compared to what you see? I think that could be identified as a Carolina wren. I'm going to figure out what way I want to create the lettering, and then I'll take some notes. I'll look up some information and put that on this side. The first time I saw or recorded the sound of the Carolina wren was May 1st of 2023 at 7:09 a.m. from my back porch. So I hope you enjoyed this. It was good therapy for me. Like I said, I needed to either take a nap or get up and do something. So I thought, okay, I'll get up and paint a bird. I'm going to do a little bit of line work with my teeny tiny pen. I just want you to see what a difference it makes. Can get the little bitty details. I can just barely suggest something if I want to, or make it a little heavier. Yeah, I like that better. You don't want it everywhere, but sometimes where you want the most attention. Like I really like the face of the bird. I like that. Oh, I know what I was going to do. Yeah, all these feathers down here, these wings that are overlapping, you can just take your fine tip pen and kind of indicate that with this. And the tail has a lot of overlapping as well. I think my head just hit the camera. Sorry about that. Back is not quite that shape. Okay, no, that's okay. All right, let me show you how cool. Well, that needs to dry a little bit more. Sometimes just taking your pen and doing some jagged marks in the branches and trunks, not even necessarily following the lines that you painted, just gives it a really good rugged look. See how I'm just kind of squiggling? Now when I get to something specific like the bird feet, then I slow down. Okay, and then there's little toes over here. Okay, let's see. I think that's good enough. If I wanted to show more of those, a little bit more of the design in his tail, I could do little squiggles for that. Anyway, I think you get the idea. Trying to figure out how I want to do the lettering. So I have this gridded ruler, and it's like if each letter is about a ½ inch. Carolina. Carolina will take up about that much space. The Wren is 4 letters, so there's really not, enough space there. I could do it up and down here. Ideally, I should have moved the bird here and left more room here, but could do Carolina. There'd be enough, and then I could do the Wren here. I think I'll try that. All right, so what I'm going to do first is line the pink down here, and I'm going to draw a line that just makes sure that it's perpendicular to the paper. I'm going to draw a very light line here. Then I'm going to slide it over, get that line that I just drew. If you can't see it, make part of it a little darker. On the red line, double checking that that's lined up. And I'm going to draw a line here. Okay, so that's the WREN will be there. I put a space between, which is 1/8 of an inch, because this ruler, each box is 1/8 of an inch, and then I go back. That line right there lines up on this ½ inch mark. All right, so that's vertical, that's vertical. I measured it about a ½ inch wide and, well, yeah, about a ½ inch wide, about 3/8 of an inch tall, so I could cram them in enough and kind of blocked them off about the same width. There's a lot of pencil lines that hopefully will not show much when I'm done. So I'm going to paint in the letters, and then I'll erase what pencil lines. No, actually, I'm going to go ahead and trace it. So when I trace it, I want a little thicker line than my 005. This is a, let's see, Uniball I. That one doesn't say waterproof. This one doesn't say waterproof. Okay. My head might be in the way when I'm doing that. I crowded the W just a little bit just so it wouldn't run into the painting. I did take a picture of the painting first before I added this, so if I wanted to use the image without any writing in anything else, then I could do that. Oops. Okay. Carolina wren. I like to erase with a kneaded eraser. Okay, what did I learn from this? First of all, know where I'm going to put my lettering before I draw my bird. Slide my bird to the left if it's facing this way, so it's not dead center. If it's facing that way, I'll slide the bird to the right. Maybe not worry so much about having it blocked and just handwrite it and have it a little heavier. I'm not really thrilled with that, but it's already done, so that's okay. I might leave it and, well, I'm going to leave it, obviously. I might come back with the little green and kind of do a filler hint of some things in the background because it's kind of boring. Yeah, I like that. I like it better now.
What?
I like it better now. I wasn't so thrilled with the lettering, and I thought, well, if I add some background, maybe that'll look better.